Hi class, welcome to Module 8, the last module before spring break. So you've got some time off after you finish this, but also remember that when you return, your photo essay is due. With that said, this particular module is covering 2 chapters. It actually could have been broken down into a day module for each, but these are both things that we've talked about throughout the course, the issues of work and the issues of media. And we tie things back repeatedly to both of these. So let's start with a review of some of the information you already know. So historically, the Industrial Revolution brings rise to the study of sociology to begin with, and very significantly in place. But Industrial Revolution is the shift of economy from agriculture to industry. Really affects the whole population, so that as we need fewer people maintaining the farm and we need more people in the city, we have the migration to cities, the lack of higher populations in rural areas. We see a change in population and the fact that we have fewer children. We start developing such things as the issues of children working, and we get work laws in place. This really is a time of major shift in how we see the world. So family reproduction is replaced with the market production, and capitalist owners pay their workers for those goods and services. So you can really start seeing, even in this process, how we start talking about conflict theory coming out and the powers and who owns what. And so we go back to this structure that might have even been in place somewhat in feudal lords. Now, in the late 60s, we move out of this industrialization, and industrialization becomes shared more across the world. And we turn our economy to service revolution. Now, a number of things are going on here, and I've always wanted to teach a course in the consumer society to look at how much has really occurred as we've moved to the service type of economy. And that is where the majority of jobs are. So very much a change in the way that society looks. With deindustrialization, there's a loss of jobs, manufacturing jobs, pretty significant as we start to explore what goes on. You can see how this also influences the place of college and jobs, and seeing the growth of the demand for higher education, because we're not in so many manufacturing jobs that come into place. We see a rapid increase of women in the workforce, but remember, women were always working. Um, but they are now in jobs that are covered by Social Security. They are not just in service jobs, and they see that participation increase. And we also see foreign and immigrant workers. And believe me, these are powerful in our economy because we need some of these in place. Examples of immigrant workers were during World War II, as we have this high level of industrialization and men off to war, women enter the workforce at a much higher level. We also significantly use other workers in our plants, and so we see a high rate of Puerto Ricans coming into the mainland United States, um, and taking those jobs. We see today the immigrant worker are overrepresented in those low-paying occupations that don't require high school degrees. So especially in our own area, we can see that by just looking at the farms, and especially grape picking, the immigrants that settle into the area, but even into construction jobs, doing jobs that other workers wouldn't do at a lower rate, becomes pretty significant as we look at this work environment. So let's see if we can look quickly at the theories because you can easily see how these come into place. So, functionalist theory used this perspective to say that the function and dysfunction of work and employment create the problems, and they also analyze the functional element of work itself, what work provides to the larger institution, and how it affects from the bigger to the little, to how it affects that individual. You can see the conflict in feminist perspective as they focus on the economic differences and the significant differences. If you recall in our gender chapter, as we look at those economic differences that come into place and the gender inequality that comes into the prospect, but also the power of the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat and who controls, and the social inequities that we talked about in the second chapter pop up right here. From the interactionist perspective, sociologists look at how work experiences create our interaction and that shared meaning, and how we belong to society based on our jobs, even how it becomes those roles that we put together and how we perceive ourselves, and that work actually defines who we are and has a base in place. So, what are the social problems related to work? Well, no surprise to you, unemployment. Unemployment has greatly been dropping by the statistics that are currently given, and we will get to that in a minute, the national statistics. But remember, people counted as unemployed are those that are still seeking employment and haven't just dropped off the job market. There is a significant level of underemployed, which is large. That means that they're working at less than their level that they're educated or skilled for, or they're working less hours. They cannot get enough hours. Underemployment is linked to higher levels of alienation, anxiety, depression, and overall health concerns. Also, an increase of spousal abuse and an increase in suicide. Now, think about this as social problems come into place, and we talk about those things, the spousal abuse as a social problem of a family, and the increase influence of not having enough money to handle the problem, much less some of the items we'll talk later about drugs and alcohol coming into place. So I wanted to share this graphic with you very quickly of the current unemployment rate. And as of October 2017, we're considered at 4.1% unemployment. And the date I'm recording this, here are the federal statistics again, and you can see that there's still some piece of starting to drop. But even for January of 2018, we're at 4.1% unemployment nationwide. Now remember, that varies greatly depending on where we live. Now, unemployment is still an issue. And we look at some of the problems that create unemployment, and we can hear that if we just listen to what's going on in the government right now in this fight back and forth, that blaming some of the problems on globalization. Now remember, globalization is a process where goods and information cross borders and are shared. If you looked at the clothing on you, the majority of clothing that we buy in the United States at reasonable prices is now made in this country. It's made somewhere else. There are positives of globalization. They create this world market. We become a world economy. We help production in other countries. We also have some concerns about that as we look at the work economy. But this increased productive and output creates more jobs and stimulus for growth by us selling our goods to other countries as well. So when we stop globalization markets out there, we can actually be hurting our economy. Now, there are downsides to globalization as well. As we can see that we are skilled workers are threatened by unfair competition. And very clearly, when there is an economic downturn, we can see large employers actually saying to their workers, if you don't take a cut in pay, the work will go across borders. And even when they take a cut in pay, the work goes across borders. So there is this fight back and forth, and we can see that the manufacturing jobs were lost. But there is many things to consider in that process, what those jobs are that come into place. Other issues are temporary workers, and we talk about the need for a livable wage. There is this argument about minimum wage back and forth, and when you start thinking about your position paper, this is often a very good topic to look at. Should minimum wage be increased, or should we even have a minimum wage that comes into place? Because minimum wage was never meant to live on, and yet today many people live on that minimum wage, and we can think then of those underemployed, that people taking jobs for less than what their value is to survive in that process. And therefore, we have the situations of, especially with women, we see them trying to support single parent headed household, working multiple minimum wage jobs coming into place and barely making it by and living pretty much at that poverty level. Other concerns include sweatshops and the issues of employment for minorities and opportunities for women, as well as looking at other things. So labor unions have been hurt very badly in the current market economy. They have served as bargaining agents for workers to fight for fair wages, and the union membership has been dropping significantly, and many states have gone to what they call right to work states, which basically say that you don't have to belong to unions, you don't have to pay those union memberships, and actually refusing to negotiate with unions or existing at that point, and people can be dismissed without just cause. So lots of things to consider in this first chapter. Now, with this first chapter, I'm asking you to watch a video that's fairly long, a PBS Frontline special on Walmart, and to look at how this globalization process comes into place and the power of industry. Now, remember, Walmart is one of the biggest employers in the service industry. Also, some of the poorest pay out there. They recently gave their workers a raise, but many of their workers work for more than that it would qualify for financial federal assistance with their insurance, but less than they can afford. Now, under the Affordable Care Act, they have to buy insurance, but they buy the cheapest possible today to get by. So some interesting pieces as you look at this video on Walmart. Now, the second chapter addresses the media. And no surprise to you, media controls even what we see and what we think about social problems, that they drive that thought of social problems. When we think of the issues related to crime, we know racial profiling's there, as we talked about in the race chapter, and we'll talk about in crime. Then we're worried about the issues brought forward for the number of police officers that are violent towards the African American population. Now remember, we often see the hype of the media, but we don't see all the statistics in place. Now, the media isn't just that television. Remember in the gender chapter for your discussion board, you were to watch the media and start to look at some of the things. But the media is all those technological processes. So even as you think about this, we become media, don't we? But especially your chat rooms, your Facebook, Twitter, all of those become that technological develop that increases our choices of what we see and what comes to it. It also creates what we're fed once we click on a regular basis on certain things. Then that's what appears in our feed to us. So they will tailor it based to how we see things. So if I were clicking regularly on Republican Party and issues, my news would come more slanted towards that way, or vice versa. If I were looking at different issues, it can see what we're seeing and even what we're putting out there. So, what are the issues when we look at this in the social perspectives? Well, media, the functionalists examine the structural relationship between media and other social institutions. So every time I've asked you to try to solve a problem in your discussion boards, you can start seeing where media is part of the issue. And the sociologists using this perspective examine the functions and the dysfunctions of media. And there are great things about media, isn't it? The sharing of information, the warning of a storm. In fact, in the catching of the Boston bombers, media is credited for the quick capture because everyone was watching for that concern and those people. And the media was so much faster in Twitter and Facebook getting to people than the traditional media of radio and television. So we look at it from both perspectives. From the conflicts perspective, you can see how theorists can focus on the messages and how they're controlled by society. So we get to this argument that's going on right now. Did the information that came through Facebook influence the election? Back and forth. And what is what is real news and fake news coming from that? Who owns the media? And if we look at the owners of the media, very easily we can see that it's held by very large corporations. So somebody like ABC, who's owned by Walt Disney, oh, and then we get to see that they own Freeform and everything else and all the other things that come into place. What all do they hold in that process? Or we look at NBC, who has MSNBC and CNBC and is owned by GE, and what all do they control? And who controls those radio waves? We've really lost free radio in very many forms, and we have major owners of radio stations. And we can see that media has some significant problems. Now, interactionists, no surprise how media defines us. And so we can even go back to looking at a girl like me. That assigned and raised. How do we pick up our preconception? That looking glass self. How do we define ourselves and what is that social reality? So media, Big Brother's watching, issues of privacy. They track our websites. The social media companies have been scrutinized for their user information. All of these things you've heard through the news, and we start looking at what's occurring. This digital divide is a growing phenomena. It's interesting as we start looking at who has the access to the media and who doesn't, and cross what is occurring. So we have this digital divide with less than 10% of the world population using the internet. It's interesting as I have Chinese students and they take my summer courses, they can't access half my videos in class like you guys are doing because the reach out there. Yet China and the United States rank the highest in internet users, but there's a lot more control in different areas and what you can be exposed to. Don't forget those feeds. There's problems with television, isn't there? The amount of time children spend in media. I regularly watch Dr. McAvoy's children, and last night when we were watching, could not get him off his device to interact with people. He spends more than 3 hours a day watching some form of television, whether it be a television or on his device. And children are often babysat through this process. So a significant thing that comes into place and some real concerns. Other social problems include distracted driving, and we have laws that don't allow cell phone usage while driving. New York is one of them, and yet we still have these issues coming in place, texting while driving, all of those things. And then the trust of the media. Our current president is always saying that this is fake news. What's going on with it? So many things for you to consider as we've talked about media throughout these other chapters. Consider it somewhat at a deeper level. For this section on media, this is an older video on media hype done by John Stossel, but I do want you to pick up a few points of it. I've given you only part one. You actually could move into part two if you find it interesting as you explore it. And finally, the last video I'm asking you to look at is a TED Talk about the good things about media, how cell phone and Twitter and Facebook can really make history and make a difference. I look forward to your comments on your discussion board. And again, I wish you a great spring break. Do something fun. And when you come back, I'm looking forward to a great photo essay from you. Have a great day.